delayed responses to maintenance requests for a broken dryer, and unclean elevators. The elevator just got to the point where you didn't even want to touch the button because it was just coated in old gum and boogers.
Ew.
Books? Check. Lunch? Check. Ball game? Check. Unlocking that off-campus apartment? Wait, what? Check. Because when students can use their mobile ID everywhere they live, learn, and go, life just works. With Resident Key in Wallet, Allegiant brings the student experience on campus now to off-campus living in one simple motion, giving students freedom, property owners fewer lockouts, smoother turnover, and stronger NOI. From campus to couch and every moment in between, it's access that finally keeps up. Because student life doesn't stop at the edge of campus, and neither should their access. Unlock it all with Allegiant.
Well, what's up, everyone, and welcome to the Student Housing Insight Podcast, where we are putting you in touch with all things student housing. I'm your host, Wesley Deese. I'm also the CEO of Student Housing Insight. This is your first time catching the podcast. We're not just a podcast, we're also a platform for off-campus student housing professionals to network, share ideas, as well as data. And you can find out more about the platform at studenthousinginsight.com. In addition to this podcast, we also host the industry's monthly webinar for the U.S. called Shop Talk. Each month during Shop Talk, we provide legislative and policy updates that are impacting our industry. Shop Talk also provides a monthly overview of pre-leasing data on a national and a regional basis, along with a panel of operators who provide their on-the-ground observations. And we also typically provide a topic of the month as well. So a lot of great information. And if you were involved with the operations of student housing in the U.S., you should certainly be registered to receive our monthly invites. You can register to receive those, as well as review prior Shop Talk webinars by going to shoptalk.info. Again, that's shoptalk.info, and we'll provide that link in the show notes as well. It is the end of May, and Gretta, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm great. How are you? Tomorrow's your birthday.
you held on to that. We went through the whole prelim and everything.
I did.
You never brought that up, and then here we are. Yes.
Very, very sneaky.
Another year older. I don't think I'm going to necessarily another year wiser.
Aw.
But, I definitely feel another year older. I don't know if I told you or not, but a couple of weeks ago, we were on vacation in Florida, and I had this trip and fall, skinned up my knees really bad. I've had to go to the hospital to have it x-rayed. One of my legs
because you were talking about your knee, and I was like, what did you do?
Oh, it was, yeah. And the doctor told me, like, you're not going to heal as fast, because I went in like 2 weeks later to say, hey, this like hematoma is not going down. Like, I'm afraid I've got a blood clot or something. And the doctor's like, well, you're not going to heal as fast as you used to. I'll be honest, it made me a little depressed.
You know what? I don't think I like it as much as I used to.
Well, hey, this is our wrap-up episode. We actually just put out this week our wrap-up. We're already late for March. We completely missed March. So we did March and April. And by the time we got it back from the editors and everything, it literally went out, the second to the last weekend of the of the month in May. But yeah, April was certainly busy, and May has been really busy too. We've been talking about the stories that we wanted to cover, and half of the stuff I was just like, where did this come from? I completely didn't hear about this.
There was a lot. They were like going through everything and compiling it. I was like, there's a lot here. And like, we had to parse it down. There was so much, just so that everyone is aware, there was a lot that happened. And right now, today's the 28th, and we were trimming it.
Well, hey, let's jump into it. But I do want to mention to everybody before we get started. I mentioned Shop Talk earlier. Our Shop Talk was last week on the 21st. I would really encourage everybody to go take a look at it. There were some important things that, and some we're not even going to cover here, but there are a couple of really important things, especially. And I know a lot of student housing operators also operate in the build to rent space, and and they typically are also what we call cottage owners in the U.S., where there are operators where you've got single family homes and duplexes, that you're renting out instead of 4-story garden buildings or whatever, right? There's some legislation that's been put forward in this new housing bill that is not going to be very favorable to the owners and the developers of BTR and student cottage housing. So strongly, we had both Dave Borzos from NMHC as well as Will Baker from Walker and Dunlop on to talk about that. So make sure that you go to that. You can go to shoptalk.info and look at the video there, or you can also look at it on our YouTube, as well as all of the podcast channels that we're on as well. But there's some important information.
Signing up, because it's every single month. There's such valuable information, even if you're just playing it in the background while you're working on other things. Shop Talk is one of those things that you need to be listening to every month, because it's always giving you such important information that we all need to be dialed into at all times. It's even like I've missed them, and I'm always sad that I did. And that's one of the main reasons why, is because there's always such valuable information included. So let me guilt everybody into it.
Yeah. Well, it's pretty much the first half of Shop Talk, and we typically don't go that long with legislative policy and legislative. So really important that you go out and listen to that. And beyond that particular segment, we also had a fantastic panel. Charlie from College House wasn't able to join us. He was on his honeymoon, I think a good 9 months after he got married. So Charlie, we missed you, but we had a great conversation between myself and Adam Barley and from Price Company and Jake Jarman from Redstone, talking about lease numbers. And we're going to talk about it here as well, because we've got some numbers from Axiometrics, that are, there's a leasing gap. We've heard from everybody, the year-over-year gap has gotten, into a negative situation. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that and how that actually compares to previous years. So we'll jump into that. But most important thing about Shop Talk, because May is Mental Wellness Month, we always get a kind of a catch up from the How Are You Foundation on all the things that they're working on in coalition with our College Student Mental Wellness Advocacy Coalition group of all the operators in the U.S. They're working on some pretty big projects that will be delivered this fall that are two tools for, one is for the operators, kind of a playbook, so to speak, for your site teams. And then the other one is an app that they're actually putting, is the How Are You app that they're going to be releasing to college students across the country. That I'm really impressed with it and love what they're doing with it. And you need to make sure that you're in the loop on that. So we will have that linked in the show notes, and check it out if you haven't seen it. All right, let's start with news. And I want to talk about not so much the operation side, but a big acquisition that happened. I'll go ahead and add my screen here. Scion Group and Ares by Harrison Street's $910 million student housing portfolio. I believe this was a total of 12 properties, if I'm not mistaken, or at least 12 campuses. Here they are: Copper Beach, Harrisonburg Apartments in Harrisonburg, Virginia, 87 at Notre Dame in South Bend, Indiana. I'm just going to go through these markets: Fairfax, Virginia, Auburn, Alabama, Pullman, Washington, Stephenville, Texas, San Marcos, Texas, Tempe, Arizona, Grand Forks, North Dakota, Binghamton, New York, Gainesville, Florida, and Columbus, Ohio. So a big deal for sure. That's want to say that's the largest transaction for 2026 so far. But I also wanted to go ahead and show a video as well, because their CEO was actually on Bloomberg talking about this. And there are a couple of key points, not just about the transaction, but the industry, that I think are really key. So let me go to that right now.
The new partnership will focus on acquiring these off-campus buildings. They're near the top universities, growing enrollments. Other markets where you purchase these properties: Tempe, Arizona, Binghamton, New York. Where else are you looking that you haven't bought?
Sure. Well, I have to say, as a University of Michigan grad, I'm not thrilled that you're calling the University of Notre Dame and Ohio State top universities, but we go with the.
Well, my wife went to the Ohio State University, so some might say I'm a smart man for saying that.
Yeah. You know what? We really like flagship state universities, particularly in growing Sunbelt states, and even more so where they have a STEM focus. For example, some of our largest campuses would be Texas A&M, University of Florida State, Purdue University. We're at about 90 campuses now. There's probably another 20 to 30 that would fit our investment thesis. And by and large, they fall within that theme of large. I would say at least 20,000 students, typically 30, 40, 50,000 students. We tend to prefer public over private, but it's situational. And again, schools that we think really represent a strong return on investment as far as the tuition dollar.
Rob, how are you thinking about demographic shifts, affordability pressures, and just broadly changing enrollment patterns right now?
You know what? I feel gratified that we've been focused on this for a decade. Since I'd say about 2015 or 2016, we've been extremely focused on the schools and then the properties within those schools that represent the greatest values. So, the 105,000 beds that we own and operate across the country, and this new acquisition fits squarely within that, is in the 50th to, I'd say, the 75th percentile in rent price. And we think that casts a very wide net as far as value and affordability. I think that people are absolutely right to be concerned about some of the highest end product that is being added with just ever more amenities and ever more cost. That's not where we play. That's not where this portfolio is. So I think you want to look first and foremost to a university that represents a good value. And so getting an engineering degree from a public university, for example, is about as strong as value could be. And then once we're at a school like that, if we can cast a wide net of product locations and floor plans and price points that across the board deliver value, that's where, we feel really comfortable for us and our investors being.
How do you think about the idea of fewer foreign students really impacting the pool of potential renters when it comes to student housing?
Across our portfolio, it's typically in the low single digit percentages. It's 1%, 2%, 3%. And by and large, those are graduate students. Our portfolio is predominantly undergrads. I will tell you, compared to other international markets where students coming from overseas are a very, very large component. If you look at Australia, or if you look at the UK and Spain, for example, those are heavily dependent on students coming from the US, coming from Korea, coming from China. That's not been the case in the United States, never been the case in the United States. What's really unique, I think, about the US compared to other markets is just not only first of all, we're by far and away the largest market for higher education in the world with over 20 million students. But on top of that, the lifestyle for undergrads in the United States is to often travel hundreds or thousands of miles away and have a true residential experience. That's not as much of a phenomenon as you go around the globe. And so for our portfolio, again, we may have certain assets that might be 5 to 10% international students, but by and large and across our portfolio, it's around 1% to 2%. And I don't really see that changing.
Well, a big congrats to the Scion Group. As Rob mentioned, that puts them over 100,000 beds now, and what Scion has been able to do, as an owner operator, not relying on third party in order to grow and kind of doing things the way they feel like student housing needs to be done, and how they've done their different brands. It's just it's very unique. I really enjoy anytime I have a conversation with anybody from the ops team at Scion. They've just got a little bit of a different view on things. I mean, they obviously manage it like the rest of us manage it, but there's a few things that are different. And yeah, just couldn't be happier for him.
It's a really great deal. It's a big deal. And those are, we talked about that. So some really great markets. So
Yeah. I did want to hit on something he said there at the end regarding I kept that clip, in there as it related to international students. And he's completely right. Like compared to the UK, I would even say Canada, but especially Australia, the number or the reliance on international students to fill off campus housing is a big number. And I would say generally, he's true. But we followed here on on the podcast and with Shop Talk. I get constantly, at least every week, if not every other week, someone sending me a DM or an email just saying, "Hey, what's going on with international students?" And I think we've all kind of come to the realization of, look, we cannot put a lot of focus on, as an operator can't put a lot of focus on international students and a lot of reliance on international students. They're great, but things have just been very kind of wonky, as it relates to visas and everything else that, we're seeing a decline. And I wanted to bring up this little bit of information. We're always really focused on what enrollment is and kind of the different segments, be it international, transfers, all that kind of stuff for the fall. But a lot happens in the spring, especially when it comes to international enrollment. And so there was this headline in May: international student enrollment falls 20% amid visa restrictions for 2026. U.S. international student enrollment plummets 20% in spring 2026 as Trump administration visa restrictions reshape higher education. Universities scramble to adapt recruitment strategies. So I know you read this article, Gretta. A couple of bullet points that you want to hit on from it.
the biggest thing that I really pulled away, one, we already know, and we've been expecting this. We've been following it, like you said, really, really closely. The biggest takeaway that we're going to see from this is actually kind of a separate item, which is going to see a build out to other markets. And that's going to help a lot of our operators who are in other markets, and that's going to be something to pay attention to, is where are these students actually migrating to. And really, if you are in the markets where, because we do actually have markets that do have a high reliance on international students. I know that obviously in this interview that we just watched, and we've heard it at the conferences over and over again, where people are like, stop relying on international students, you're not going to. That sounds wonderful, but it is still something that a lot of people do. You and I have consulted on projects where we know that they have a very large reliance on international students, regardless of circumstances. So it is something to note, pay attention to, keep track of the numbers. Where are we at with it? Are they going to directly impact your number one international students that are coming to your market? And if so, how are you going to backfill? And we do know, because that was one of the biggest things that we have been trying to track, is did this, drastically reduce the number of students that we have coming in currently? We now know that it did. And, this is really what we're going to be looking at. And further, that we are seeing those students now instead heading to Australia and Canada, and then larger amount of student housing development actually happening in each one of those areas as well.
I remember a time in this industry, we would have webinars or we would have discussions on, talking about how to reach more students and kind of creating, I won't ever forget, there was a property in your neck of the woods at Purdue, I believe it was, where the manager really bragged about, having a Chinese student on payroll that, obviously spoke Mandarin, and they had a huge Chinese population. And that's great. I mean, they did a fantastic job of creating a community for them, but that is one of those things.
Actually, because it was also being able to market directly to the Chinese community. And that was a really, really big deal, because it could be so difficult and you have to pay for different companies to be able to market directly to them. I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've often thought about, how is that ending up this year? Right. And that I want to think about that, because if it's something where, because my question is, okay, then where are they going to go? There's only so many universities in the UK. There's only so many universities in Australia. Sure, they may send them there, but there's going to have to be places where they go. And, Trump and Xi just met recently in China. And, this was a part of that discussion as well. And I think there were some positive movements there. But another article that came up that I think really speaks to this, and this is from Indexbox. Student housing emerges as top alternative real estate investment in China amid supply. A growing number of university students combined with a supply gap is fueling investor interest in dormitory style housing and premium offices, according to a recently published study. The source, a report by property consultancy CBRE, indicates that student housing is expected to be a top investment choice in mainland China's property market as demand continues to exceed the supply of suitable accommodation for university students, which we already knew that was the case, that there wasn't enough housing for students. And here we are. I kind of read this as less students are coming to the US, either because the government is saying you can't, our government or the Chinese government. And, now we're creating, I think a lot of that is creating a demand in China.
Well, and the other thing about this too is that this creates a lot of, and for people who follow the economy and finance in China, this actually creates an economic resolution for Chinese and the Chinese government, because there were some real estate issues that they were having, where there was a real estate boom and then those buildings didn't get filled. This actually allows them to potentially take a lot of those buildings that ended up being empty and redevelop them into off-campus housing, where that potentiality actually is available or arises. And so that's going to work out well for them in a lot of cases. But like I said, that also keeps a lot of that talent that normally we get to take advantage of, that allows them to keep it there and then utilize that talent going forward for their future technologies and advancements, and as opposed to having it come abroad. And it also has them keep their spending at home, et cetera. And so that's really why they want to be able to invest in those students and trying to keep them there. That's generally why a lot of these countries don't want their students to be leaving and coming to the United States. And so it's really where that motivation comes from. But that's also, this article right here is why I'm saying for our operators and our friends within the industry, when you are, within the international community and building overseas, it is paying attention to, again, to get on my subreddit thing, which you teased me about the other day. The international market is something that I follow really closely. And yes, on the subreddits as well, is what the general temperature is of international students and what their feedback is and what their chatter is. And, where they are potentially looking at going as opposed to the US, if they're thinking about it, or what they're talking about. And, these are the places that they are looking at. And so for those operators and developers that do, like I said, operate outside of the US, paying attention to that as well. And, those trends, so that they can stay in front of them, to potentially help other countries and take advantage of those trends.
Yeah. Sticking with moving on from international students, but and we've got another I wouldn't call it an acquisition, but a fundraise that I want to talk about. But before we get to that, let's kind of stick with the policy and legislative a little bit. And this is not so much news as it is me telling everybody, make sure you're following me on LinkedIn. Also, make sure that you're following John Bradford at Pet Screening. For those of you that use Pet Screening, you should be familiar with their services. But there's some things that are going on in regards to emotional support animals and the current policy from HUD. I'm going to tell you, nothing has been changed, but the New York Times basically kind of leaked something over the weekend regarding that there was an internal memo that basically said, hey, we think, as far as the Trump administration, feels like the ESA animal thing has grown. ESA animal, I guess that's kind of repeating animal.
Emotional
right?
support animal. It's like your PIN number.
But considering that protected under disabilities and that type of thing, that they're saying there's got to be some cutback. And a lot of that was because a lot of the reason we saw companies like Pet Screening become a thing is because we saw so much abuse of the ESA status. And so, instead of what I, love about pet screening is like, hey, we're going to, and John Bradford, was a property manager before he developed, as well as a legislator before he developed pet screening. And so he knew the struggles from a property management standpoint of, well, how do we serve the resident best and make sure that we've got animals that are actually support animals and not someone that, was able to get something off the internet because they paid $10 for for some kind of certificate. Right. And so they go through the process of doing the background checks and making sure that it's a true ESA. So they jumped into this. John jumped into this on his LinkedIn profile. So that's why I say go follow them, because his team is definitely keeping a very close look on things and will continue to give, information and guidance to certainly their members and, property management industry at large. But yeah, one thing, I've just got to pick this out because I love how New York Times kind of blows things out of proportion a little bit. I think out of proportion, but the Trump administration has moved to drastically narrow the definition of qualifying assistance animals in federally regulated housing, a policy shift that could result in eviction of thousands of disabled tenants across the country, according to reporting by the New York Times.
Well, here's the other thing. And I just thought about this because I read that too. And I was like, why are you going to phrase it like that? I was like, that's so hyperbolic. But the other thing is that I'm like, did the New York Times say that? I was like, or is this article stating that? Because again, when I was talking about the Times, I'm like, that typically you can't add that level of narration. And so now I want to go back to the Times article and be like, how did they phrase it?
Yeah, I'm not paying the subscription for New York Times.
I know you're not going to, but I'm still I'm still curious because who added that opinion in there?
Yeah, this is another Lavoci D, New York. I don't even know what it is, but it was the one place that was reporting on it this past weekend as a follow up to the New York Times article. But there's plenty of information on LinkedIn. You can find out about it. There's probably more news sources now, but
yeah, that's a terrible way to phrase it.
Keep your ear to the ground and don't go. If this gets changed, don't go evict your residents.
Don't be that person
with ESAs. Just start charging them pet rent. That was the whole thing to begin with. Is hey, we need pet rent and a deposit, to cover any kind of damage.
Yeah. Look at those little buggers. They owe us rent. Tell them to go get a job. Squatters.
All right. So let's move on to the next story. And this is Core Spaces. They closed on a $1.64 billion flagship fund, underscoring strong investor confidence in student housing. We've talked a lot about Core Spaces, another, owner operator that, I'm just thrilled that's a part of this industry. We got several ambassadors that are with Core Spaces, and I just, love the energy and, the track that they're on. They are building some big projects. So I don't know that the $1.64 billion goes as far as it used to when you're building $3,000 or 3,000 bed properties, but it's definitely a huge fund and it's historical. So any thoughts?
It's a huge amount. I was just like, this is exciting. Look at, I was like, that was really the thought that went through my head when I read it. I was like, well, and it was also that it really, when you get that huge amount, I feel like the title says it all, where it's the strong investor confidence, but it isn't just in student housing. It's also in the product that the company itself is producing. Let's be honest, because they're not going to just produce that or to provide that to just anyone. And so that does speak to Core and the product that they put out there. And that was the other thought.
Yeah, and a couple of bullet points from this. So it's considered Fund 4, and it exceeded the initial $1 billion fundraise, 64% over what they were looking for. The strategy focuses on tier 1 university markets and urban infill student housing projects across the U.S. Core Spaces portfolio now includes over 74,440 beds owned or managed. They do have some managed stuff, but those are pretty close relationships, from what I understand, previous investors and GPs and stuff. So with a pipeline of 53,860 beds in development. Article also underscored broad
Over 3
institutional
properties.
Did I say over 3 properties?
No, that was my joke because they're. Thank you.
No, that was great. Perfect timing. But it does. The article did say that the fund will support both new development and acquisitions nationwide. So I was waiting to hear maybe they were going to go into Canada or to another country, but looks like all that's going to stay here. So yeah, congrats to Core Spaces.
No kidding.
All right, should we start talking about our favorite subject, which is this leasing season?
This year, man, and like I said, I've said it a million times. We knew it was coming. We've known for the last. I've talked to you and I've talked about it a million times. We were getting here, and yeah, yikes.
So
the time has come.
So the article, let me first talk about Shop Talk again and some things that were discussed. And the numbers from College House were showing about 1.5% year over year behind. And rents were, so that was pre-leasing velocity, and then rents were showing, just a little over 1%, maybe 1.5% year over year increase. But those are your market rates, right? So that doesn't include any kind of specials. It doesn't include other concessions and gift cards and things like that are going out. But when Charlie sent over that report, and I had passed it around to a couple of folks that are on the operating side, typically regional leasing and marketing managers, folks like that, and said, hey, what are your initial thoughts? And a lot of them came back and said, if that's a 1.5% gap, like that is the widest 1.5% gap as far as how it felt. They just said that they really felt everybody was much further behind than that. And that, just in the past week and looking at College House, that's shifted pretty widely. I think it got up to like 2.8%. By the time we were actually on Shop Talk a few days later. And so it's definitely behind, but I think this article from RealPage, and keep in mind, RealPage and Axiometrics probably have the longest stretch of analytics as far as history. And what I thought was really cool about this article, and showing this kind of the 5-year trend. So each of these colors for each month, each of these colors show basically the pre-leasing percentage for these months going back to 2022. And so this is April ending. And as you can see there, yes, we're nearly 70%, just under 70%. But not only is that the lowest over these past few years, and another article that I read as well, this is actually the lowest in their tracking from Axiometrics back to 2015. So this isn't, a lot of us were saying, it's back on track with 2019. And it is, but as far as April ending, they're saying it goes back to 2015. So
I think, and like I said, I've been saying this, and I'm going to say it plain as day at this point, because we are at the end of the year, because I've said it directly to you, which is that I feel, well, and actually it's funny because obviously we know that we just talked about the fact that the other episode just came out a couple of days ago. Obviously, this one will probably be out in, we'll say, like a week. But how, you had talked about that at Interface, there were some people that you had spoken to who were like, oh, we're not really feeling it. And I was like, I want names. Like, I want to know who said that. give me names, like how many, where are their markets where they're not feeling it? And it really was because, like I said, this has been stuff that I've been watching really closely. It was intentional that I was, and it's because of the fact that I really was going to be shocked if there wasn't this huge shift that came into place this year. And it's, it's just a pendulum swing. And I don't think that there's going to be a swing back. I think that, we saw a huge, and it's really because of the fact that this isn't just about rents. This is about rents. It's about tuition. We're seeing a lot of collisions all at once that brought us to this point. And a lot of rents that we did have increase, they increased far too broadly for them to be sustainable. And you heard me say that so many times. And that was in conjunction with tuition. And what's so fascinating about this is that this was the same. I made this exact same statement on a phone or, on a call with a number of investors and lenders. And I had people on that call who were like, I've got a daughter and we're looking at it. And what is this? Like, this is literally someone who's a part of a portfolio that is invested like as a part of something that I'm a part of, who's saying this about like the dichotomous nature of that, the conversation where they're actively going to be impacted by the rents of my properties, right? And, so it's like if we increase them, they're positively impacted by that. If we decrease them, they're negatively impacted by that. But they're also agreeing that they are too high basically everywhere. So that was a fascinating response to me as I'm stating that we climbed too high. Like,
yeah,
the wax is melting off. And that was really part of the problem. And so, yes, I'm not at all surprised. It was that we had a sweet spot. And that's, we have to be able to reach that point again. And it's not going to be a part where we can go, this is how far this margin is going to be. And that's a good place to be in. It isn't a good place to be in when every single, executive and investor and lender is going, I can't send my kid to college and afford to cover their rent. Those are our co-signers and guarantors. We went too far with those rights, and that's the problem. It extended too far.
And I can get into a little bit of, well, I'd love to get into a little bit of my thoughts on data sharing, but that's actually another story we're going to jump into here in a second. But so I'll just park it for that. But the same issue this past week, I've been working on a deal for a client that's looking to potentially invest, and it's a market that I'm very, I've got great connections with the university and very intimate knowledge of the market. And I'm kind of seeing things where they had a good year this past year. And from a previous delivery that I had years ago in this market, I'm looking at it, I'm like, wow, this has really gotten strong. I would probably give a thumbs up on this, but they're looking at it from a standpoint of year over year pre-leasing, in that particular market looks to be maybe 2.5% behind. I'm like, actually, that's where the national average rate is. So it's not bad, but and then I start opening up and explaining to them what's happened. What we saw in fall of 2020, where everybody was just trying to get back to school and have some kind of normal life after, being in lockdown and missing out their, the end of their spring semester. And then we had, the constant closures that were happening in fall of 2020. And when we got to 2021, everybody wanted to be off campus that could be off campus because they didn't want to deal with the closures happening again. And on top of that, you ended up, especially the flagship schools, had really kind of woke up to the fact of, this lockdown is going to keep international students from coming here. We need to accept more in-state and domestic students. And so there was this big flight to quality that happened. And you saw a lot of dorms or a lot of campuses having to go, specifically in fall of 21, having to do master leases off campus because they accepted so many students that actually showed up. So then going into fall of 22, especially again across all the big flagships and that, Power 5 market, we started seeing early lease up and a lot of folks that were, doing what you do when you see strong demand, you raise the rents. And that happened for 2-3 cycles. And now the students have certainly pushed back and said, you know what? Seeing what happened, especially last year where it was early. And then by the time we got towards even the beginning of spring semester, we started seeing a lot of people start giving out concessions and gift cards and all of that. And yeah, the students have just said, you know what, I'm gonna wait and do this on my terms and not get roped into something early, which, as we've also talked about on the past couple of episodes and on Shop Talk, it has turned to legislation by these local, towns and cities, basically putting in policies that keep you from being able to offer anything. Maryland and I think Michigan were kind of the prime example, where you can't even go to the students that are living with you until February to give them an official offer. So it's interesting.
Things are changing.
Yeah. They are. And to the point, and this brings me to my next story, something, until we got on this, this call and started doing some prep, I was like, oh, I completely missed this. And this is from the Daily Texan. Student-led initiatives highlight housing concerns in West Campus. Let me just kind of read a couple of things here and kind of where this is going. But finance junior Elijah Wang Chen was inspired to create Rate My Rent UT after experience searching for affordable off-campus housing as a freshman and sophomore. Wang Chen said he wanted to create a tool that transparently compared student housing prices and conditions for students. That's incredible because that's what the operators want to do. But in less than 3 months, the site received 1,275 responses. The website, which allows students to compare hundreds of apartment rent submissions in West Campus, is just one example of multiple student-led initiatives that have outlined concerns regarding affordability and housing conditions in West Campus. This article goes on to talk about, and I'll look down here for just a second. I don't want to really get into specific things that are happening in West Campus for UT Austin, but funny, while I'm looking for this, give me your thoughts.
First off, when I, saw this article, I was just like, this is incredible. One, because obviously we know, again, based off of the last episode and from LeaseCon, we have an exceptional product that's hopefully going to be here in the States very, very soon that will exist and assist with this. But, it's like, this is something that to me is exceptional and should exist. And I love that that a student also agreed and wanted it to exist. The transparency, I feel very strongly about, but I loved that a student came up with it and was just like, this needs to be here. It benefits all of us. And I want it. So I made it. And here you go. And the fact that so many students responded in that set period of time, like just everything about this, I absolutely thought was incredible. I do think, and I think that a lot of people would agree with this. It's like, we don't always love when we receive negative feedback or, like it doesn't feel great. It's, from that perspective, it can suck. But from the other perspective, we all also know that there are properties that we wish got called out on stuff. There are some, operators or managers that we wish did, that we wish, we didn't have some of our students that were being exploited. And that's a reality too, because again, why did we all get into this business? Yeah. Because we felt passionately about the communities we serve, the universities we serve, and creating home for students during their most important years while they're being educated. And without really transparent tools that allow for things like this, then we can't really always do it to the best of our ability and for the university. And so I love this. I love it.
Yeah. And I'll click on his website or the program.
Oh, this is 100% designed by AI.
Yeah, pretty sure.
It's kind of like when something's written by AI, sometimes you just you see it instantly.
Yeah, but essentially what it is our students are able to actually go in here and enter what they are paying for rent. Now, I want to have a conversation with Elijah because I think he needs to be tracking pre-leasing rents, not in place what they're current paying, because that no longer matters when someone's actually trying to look, what they're paying. So yeah, we've reached out to Elijah and maybe we'll have him on the podcast and talk about this. But the other thing I wanted to mention here, it's in this article, another large issue the union is tackling, and this is a student union, is predatory pre-leasing, which occurs when an apartment pressures new or returning residents to sign a lease anywhere from 9 to 12 months in advance. It is predatory to sign a lease that far in advance because anything could happen, said Sandhop, a government and history senior. You could end up dropping out for whatever reason. You could end up leaving Austin. You're locked into a contract and there's nothing you can do about it unless you can find someone to take over your lease. Sandhop said one of the union's major goals is to push the city of Austin to place regulations on pre-leasing, limiting it to 6 months in advance. I personally feel like there is this false narrative that housing goes fast in West Campus and that it's competitive, and these companies need to sign a lease as fast as you can or else you'll be homeless, Sandhop said. The current pre-leasing condition makes some students feel pressured to sign early without being fully informed, Sandhop said. Environmental scientist sophomore Madeline Day said she frantically decided as a freshman to sign a lease with, I'm not going to name the property, after a friend told her to. Day said her apartment is located on the same floor where an electrical fire occurred in March. She said she signed her renewal lease around a month before the fire. But if she could choose now, she would move. Day was not displaced by the fire. From the way it sounded like she was displaced. However, she said she has dealt with, and I'm getting to probably the funniest sentence I've ever read in a student housing article, so stay tuned. Day was not displaced by the fire. However, she said she has dealt with other maintenance issues this year, such as delayed responses to maintenance requests for a broken dryer and unclean elevators. The elevator just got to the point where you didn't even want to touch the button because it was just coated in old gum and boogers.
Ew.
But anyway, this article goes on to talk about this student union also trying to reform university neighborhood overlay program, which is real news, especially if you are looking to develop in Austin. So make sure we'll put the link to this article in the show notes. But again, I think this is probably 3, maybe 4 episodes in a row of these wrap-up episodes where we're talking about students feeling all of this pressure to sign. I know the amount of text messages and chat bots and everything that they're having to communicate with, to us as, and I say to us, but to the property managers, to the owners. I get it's probably a lot. And if you're an operator and you're hearing this and you're thinking, yeah, maybe we shouldn't be texting them 3 times a week about renewing, you need to think about that internally, because I'm telling you, the way that these local cities and student groups are pushing back on this, it's going to end up causing a lot of problems.
Well, it's funny.
And unfortunately, it's going to end up causing more problems for them than it is the operators, but it's going to cause a lot of issues.
Well, we talked about that, but it's speaking as somebody who, and we've talked about this as well, who came into this industry from not student housing. I remember being so very confused by just, again, having a different perspective on it, just being so very confused by the whole concept of having leases signed so far in advance and renewed so far in advance. And it, was explained because, the leases fill up and this is the way that the market works and, all of these things. And it's like, at a certain point, I am just curious. Is it that, because in some markets, like for instance, in South Bend, we do know that you do have leases, or this happens sometimes in Oxford as well. There are markets where this does happen, where the students are dictating the terms. But, are there some markets where that is potentially no longer the case, but a sense of urgency is being communicated that may no longer exist, but pressure because of pre-existing conditions happening for so long, that urgency is still so. I don't love that I'm saying this because I feel like I'm just going to piss everybody off. But, it's like, because those conditions have existed for so long, those expectations are still being upheld, where it's like, these were our historical numbers. And if we're not meeting them, then we're all falling behind. And we have all been faced with that from the people above us, from our, our investors, from our ownership groups, from our, from whomever. And it's like, this is where the term "the customer is always right" actually comes from, is they dictate the terms of the purchase. They decide what product goes on the shelf because they're purchasing it. They determine the movement of the market because they're coming in to sign the leases. And if they're not actually signing the leases until later in the market, then that's where the market shift moves to. And that may not be the case in every market, but if it becomes the case in some of our markets, then we're going to see that leasing curve shift. It's a wave. It's a wave.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Water.
I remember
Move with the water.
I remember having a conversation, in I guess it was fall 22, maybe fall 23. And I think it was a property in the Clemson market that, just leased up really, really quick. And I remember having a conversation with, someone that was on the investment side because they were teeing up this, this property to be sold. And so they had, a real strategic plan on tiering their rates and what their triggers were going to be and how they were going to monitor everything. And the property manager was like, I know I typically wait till October 1st before I get rates out, but I'm already, and this is before move in. She's like, I'm already hearing from people that, they want to lease for next year. And so I think they gave her permission to pre-lease a few of them at a 3-4% rent increase. And there ended up being such demand on it. And anyway, when they ended up opening, the gates on everything, sometime mid-September, he told me that manager called her probably 5 times in one day on like the first or second day of them releasing their rates. And they had like 5 rate increases during that day. And I remember talking to that manager specifically because I know her, and she actually mentioned, she was like, I felt like I couldn't serve my residents, and that we didn't know what we were doing, because I was having to pick up the phone and call for permission to do this, and they were home office was kind of getting frustrated because they felt like, they felt like they weren't going to be able to stick to their guns on what they wanted to do, because when you're leasing that fast and you end up having roommates that are coming in, like you can quickly, if you set a tier like a trigger at like 70%, and all of a sudden you've got 12 more beds that you filled up just like that, you may have missed your trigger by 6 or 7 beds.
Yeah.
And they were really concerned, and it's you gotta be ready either way. you got to have the infrastructure and the plan in place in case that happens. And then if it's not going to happen that quick, you've got to be able to serve the students from a standpoint of giving them their space. It's been a crazy couple of years, few years. Yeah. So anyway, we will link all of these to our show notes. I think we've got one more here that I want to hit on. This is from National Association of Home Builders. Came out on May 1st. Student housing construction investment holds steady in the first quarter of 2026. And I'll just hit on a few bullet points here, probably provided to us by Claude or ChatGPT. But this was, so private fixed investment in student housing or student dormitories edged up 0.1% in Q1 of 2026. Holding the seasonally adjusted annual rate of $3.9 billion, marking a third consecutive quarterly increase despite elevated interest rates. Third consecutive quarterly increase in construction spending, signaling sustained development activity. Year-over-year investment remained essentially flat, reflecting cautious but stable capital deployment. And annual new bed deliveries have fallen dramatically from 102,000 average in between 2015 and 2019 to 46,000 in 2025, which was a 55% decline. Supply-demand imbalance continues to support fundamentals, particularly at Power 4, now Power 5 conference schools. So again, going back to the flagships, that seems to be where all of the development is focused. So it's going to be interesting to see to see how much more development is out there.
I think that one, I thought that this was really great. Again, I know that not everybody is.
Let me tell you one place they need to be developing in the California system.
Oh my gosh, without a doubt. Like seriously, there's so much. And there's new legislation, again, to remind everybody, there's new legislation that's hopefully opening up a lot of opportunity for that. And wherever possible, hopefully it is the development of pre-existing buildings and properties. But the thing that I think that is really great about this is that it is the continued investment into our sector, and that is always good news for every single person, every single life that exists within and because of this industry. We're all positively impacted for, by nearly every single dollar that comes into our industry. So we always want to see the money continue to flow into our areas.
Yeah.
So,
and I bring this up because I know we have a lot of new development, leasing and marketing folks that follow the podcast and the webinars that we do and everything else. And I've had some of them reach out. This is really kind of going back to LeaseCon, TurnCon back in December, but several of them, because for the past 4 or 5 years, they've been from one city to the next city with a new development. And I remember asking a couple of them, hey, where's the next assignment? And they're like, I don't know. I think they're going to keep me in Knoxville or, wherever. And just this past week, I had somebody reach out. He's like, I've been in this industry for, 7 years now. I've always been on a new development. I'm now being told that, I'm going to be, switching to another team or whatever, because they don't have a new development for me to go to. And just this story, I think, kind of highlights that of, what we should expect on the, the op side, the lease up side on new dev. I think we're going to have less and less of those. And if, if you're in that situation where maybe you've been in the Southeast or the Southwest and have done, but you're kind of refusing to go to some other area. If you want to stay in new dev, you're probably going to have to get comfortable with moving to some regions that maybe you haven't been before.
I think it's always a good idea. Always get all the exposure that you can. That's the biggest thing that I can tell you.
Oh yeah.
Get exposed to every single market you possibly can.
Yeah.
That was like the best advice that I was ever given by Steve Wunsch, actually. If you have the opportunity, never say no.
Oh yeah, Steve. I know Steve.
He is amazing. He was my trainer back when I was still in conventional housing, and was also how I met some of my favorite people out in Oskimos, as we fondly call it, and one of my very best friends in the entire world. But yes, Steve Wunsch is an absolutely exceptional person. And that was one of the, like I said, the best advice that he gave. And I took it fully to heart. And that is one of the main reasons why I have worked in so many markets and lived all over this fair country. So that is thanks to Steve. Mwah. Thank you, Steve Wunsch.
Speaking of people that we know, I'm sure by the time this comes out, it'll probably be a week or so before Apartmentalize in New Orleans. So for those,
it's going to be back in New Orleans.
NOLA. So yeah, if you're gonna be down in New Orleans, drink a hurricane for me, I guess. And there's a possibility I may be there. Right now, I don't think it's going to happen, but there is a possibility that I may be there. But
there is not a possibility that I will be there.
I'm sure there won't. And the thing with Apartmentalize, I did a survey on LinkedIn, and I don't know if anybody from NAHB listens to this, but I'm just going to share with you what folks in the industry are telling me, because I had a conversation with somebody just about, hey, what's happening, from a student housing track at Apartmentalize. And they're just like, we don't really have one this year. And I don't know. I don't know if the student housing operators aren't getting the value out of it, if it's, if they're not creating the value for them. I mean, NAHB, I think, is a great organization and do so much.
Oh, without a doubt.
Do so much for our industry. But like I said, I did a little bit of a poll on LinkedIn regarding who was going. And I think out of 25 people that voted in it, the ones that said, yes, they were going, and it was about a 50-50 split. I think it was like 13 people said that they were going. Out of those 13, only 2 were student housing operators, and they had, multifamily in their portfolio as well. And then on the other side of that, there were 12 people that said, no, I'm not going this year. And like 7 or 8 of them, were student housing operators that have certainly, have gone before. And so, I don't know if it's they don't want to be in New Orleans during June. I don't know if it's, I didn't dig deep in that, but yeah, I think there's if you've never been before, it's a huge conference.
It's a lot.
It is.
It's for sure a lot.
It is a lot. It is definitely the biggest event within the multifamily industry for sure. And but yeah, I hope they put some more time into creating a student housing track, because we need our conferences.
The thing is that when it comes to the conferences overall, like I said, I absolutely love NA in general. But the conferences themselves, Interface, we already know those are my top conferences. They're the ones that I never want to miss. And if I'm not there, it's strictly because there's a family emergency of some kind that I absolutely have to stay home because of, or, just something that is requiring me to not be there. Outside of that, it's like NMHC was the other conference that I considered to be the one to go to. And it really typically is, because when it comes to our industry, you want to know that you're going to have that return on your investment, and that you're going to be able to actually see and interact with the people that you're going there to see and interact with. And at Apartmentalize, you don't have that ability. It is just it swarms and seas of people everywhere. And it kind of, it was like we were in San Diego a few years ago, the one that we went to, and my brother's in San Diego, obviously, as you know. And, he even compared it to Comic-Con. Like, it was just, there's too many people. And that, that was just the problem with it. You can't find anyone. And that was a part of it, when you're trying to find your own and you simply cannot.
Yeah. Yeah. We did do in Atlanta, I think it was the year before San Diego. We ended up doing a student housing meetup, and, and that was great, because there was, in Atlanta, you've got kind of 3 or 4 student housing companies that are based there. And so a lot of them were going. And then of course you've got, just because of the hub that Atlanta is, you've got a lot of other student housing professionals that are there. That obviously opted in that they were going to go because it was in their town. So we had like a happy hour thing at Cam Newton's bar across from the stadium, and that was a lot of fun. And we haven't done it since, because I keep doing this internal survey, and it's like, there's just not enough student housing folks going. So, but if I would definitely encourage folks to go if you've never been to one, for sure. That being said, I think we're 3 weeks out, and there is a point here I want to bring up for the supplier folks that are out there. Again, we're at the time of this recording, we're 3 weeks out. Today alone, before we started recording, I probably got 5 emails of people wanting me to meet up, and it's just, that part is insane, and it will make someone nauseous before they even go. So I don't know what the right answer is. Obviously, you want to try to make appointments, and understand you've got sales quotas to make and everything else, but that is the one thing I'm hearing from everybody, is just the insane number of emails that come out with that conference. So anyway.
Yeah.
Well, it's been great. I'll see you in June for sure. And anything else happening?
No.
Well,
happy almost your birthday.
And I also want to thank our sponsor for this episode, Allegiant. I promise you, Allegiant will not send you a bunch of emails going into Apartmentalize. But Allegiant handles access control and for multifamily properties, and they've got a huge focus that they are on right now with what they're calling campus to community access. And that's one of the reasons they reached out to us, because there's just been a lot of thought leadership that they have really put into this product or products, I should say, and this overall concept. And they've actually got a webinar coming up that Student Housing Business is doing for them. It's on June 10th, and they're covering that whole campus to community access. And we'll definitely put a link below. It's also going to be on it is, I should say, on our events page. All of the industry events are going to be there that anybody tells us about. There's some that people don't tell us about, so we don't put them on there. But always, you can go to studenthousinginsight.com/events and see all the events there. We are also doing a webinar called the New Marketing Playbook, which is, I'm really excited about this. I had another call today and saw a demo on a new product that's related to ranking your AI search. And this is going to be a powerful webinar. We've got Misty Williams from Student Quarters on there, who's going over her own playbook for that she's released this year to her sites, and giving some high level stuff for the webinar. So you do not want to miss that. That is going to be on June 11th at 1 p.m. And again, we'll have all of that linked, but you can go to studenthousinginsight.com/events. Gretta, thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you.
I hear from a lot of folks that they say this is, we only put out 3 episodes a month or so, but they're telling me this is their favorite episode.
I love that.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Bye.